Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is cutting our bias strips for the corset. So we will have two very long bias strips that will go on our neckline as well as our hemline. So we're cutting two bias strips that are long enough for our neckline as well as our hemline. We are actually going to cut these longer than we need because we will do a little technique at the end to kind of help finish the ends. So you'll leave yourself some extra space on either end, okay? And I'm not going to give you a specific measurement because it kind of just depends on the length of your neckline and how you designed your neckline. Okay, so make sure it's longer than your actual seam that you're going to stitch it to. And then the width is going to be 2¼ and they are cut on the bias. Okay, so I've got mine here. I'm just gonna, for the video, just do the top neckline one. The bottom one is pretty straight and it'll be the same technique. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go over to the ironing board and we're going to pre-fold and press our strip. Okay, so we're just gonna fold in half wrong sides together. We're gonna press this, and as I'm pressing, I'm trying to lift the iron and move it along rather than dragging it so that we don't stretch out our bias strip and make it more narrow. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to where I'm looking at the wrong side of my fabric, and we're gonna fold in each of those edges to that center crease line that we just created. So again, every time that I'm scooting along, I'm kind of picking it up and letting it hover above the surface of my fabric rather than dragging it along my fabric so I don't stretch it out. Okay, and then as we go along, I'm gonna let it cool so I don't burn myself. But as we go along, we're going to then refold that center crease and just repress it to make sure that it's nice and crisp. So our finished product should look like this, where it is that quarter fold, and it should finish to a 1/2 inch wide. So just like this. I'm going to continue doing that down the full length. Okay, so there were some questions about fabric choice for this bias strip. It just needs to coordinate with your design. So if you have a sheer shell, I would pick something solid fabric that just coordinates with your design. It can be the same as your shell fabric if you want the exact same and you want those bias strips to kind of blend in with the corset. It can be potentially your lining fabric, though if your lining is slick, it will make pre-folding your strip a little bit more challenging. So you can kind of pick what fabric you want for that edge, just depending on your design aesthetic. Okay. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, we've got this pre-folded, like the bias strips that you buy in the packages at the store, but we're making our own so that it's coordinating fabric with our design. And now we're going to open this up. And we're going to put it right sides together. And again, leave off some extra at the end. But we're going to go ahead and pin it to the outside of our corset. And we're just doing one layer. So we've got it fully open. The bias of this strip will help you conform to those curves of your neckline. And then if you've got a point at center front where your sweetheart dips in, I'm going to show you how to deal with that as well. Okay, so we've got that fully pinned to our neckline. Now we're going to take this to our machine and stitch it at 1/2 inch. Okay, when I come to my point at my front, so mine has a little bit of a sweetheart where it comes down to a point. Right there, I'm following that neckline to the point. And then when I get to that center front area, which you can also mark this with like a marking tool to know exactly where that center front line is, you're gonna pivot and make sure that your bias strip is still even with the other side. And I'm gonna kind of flatten this. There we go. So make sure that you've got a really nice flat piece of fabric right in front of your needle so you don't end up with any tucks. And I've pivoted, so now I'm gonna follow the other side of that neckline. So my stitch should have that same point to it that the neckline does. So if you have that point right at the center front, so this is my little, it's a very slight point, not very sharp, but we need to slit that area. So right at center front, I'm going to slit down to my seam allowance through all of those seam allowances. If you have a curved front or a straight front, you don't have to worry about this. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this to our ironing board and press this bias strip up. So we're just going to fold it up and just kind of repress this seam here. And then I will come back. Okay, so we're just going to take that bias strip, press it up away from our neckline. When you get to your shaped areas, you can put this on a hanger to make sure that you're not pressing your bust flat. You can just put it on a ham to kind of fill out that bust area and allow you to keep the shape there. So now we are going to look at creating that point right at our center front neckline. So looking at the inside of your garment, you're going to open it up. So this top fold where the very raw edge is going to stay folded. So on the other side, you should have an inch of bias strip showing. Half an inch is taken up with the neckline seam allowance, and we've still got that other half inch folded back. And now we're going to take that and fold it right on center front, right sides together, so that we're looking at the inside of our garment. And it's going to be right on center front. So I'm going to make sure that I'm double checking that I've got, like, these princess seams are lining up so that I know I'm right in the center. Okay, and then we're going to follow the slant of our neckline. So you can mark yours using your pattern piece if you want to mark that slant. Mine is very, very slight again. So it's just we're essentially stitching a triangle where we're going from our stitch line here on our neckline out to the center fold of our bias strip. So up and out like the tip of a triangle, and then we're going to go back down. So it's going to create this triangle that's pointing in towards the rest of our garment. Okay, so I'm going to start from the center, and there's a crease. You can't see it very well on camera, but this is my center crease of my bias strip. I'm going to start from there and go down to my neckline, and then I'm going to go back over that just to kind of reinforce this. So I'm going to start from the middle, go down to the neckline, back up to the middle, and then out to the edge. Okay, so let me cut off my little tail so you have a cleaner view. You can see my little triangle here where I went from my neckline up to the tip of the triangle and then back out. So your triangle may be more pointy if you have a more dramatic dip at the center of your neckline. Okay. Now I'm going to snip right there, snip in the middle of my triangle so that I can release. So just took a little snip right at the center of the triangle. And now I'm going to fold that back down. So this is on the inside. We've got our little point created. And on the outside, we should have the same. A little seam with a point created. Okay. Okay, so the next thing we need to do before we can do our full stitch in the ditch is finish the ends. And we're going to do it in a very similar way where we've got these two edges folded in. So from the front, you should only see that 1 inch of bias strip. Your 2 half-inch seam allowances should be folded towards the back. We're going to fold down that center crease. So this bias strip right now is right sides together and I'm looking at the seam allowance. I'm going to pin that and then we're going to do an edge stitch right next to the edge of our fabric, like the end of our corset. So not on top of my corset fabric, but right next to. Okay, and now I can trim off my excess. And I'm gonna miter my corners. So you should just have a very little bit of seam allowance left there and trim off the majority of it. And then this is going to allow us to flip this right side out. We'll use a point turner or something to kind of get a sharp corner there, but that finishes the end of our bias strip really nice and clean. And it should be nice and even. If you stitch close enough to that corset edge, should be nice and even with your corset. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on my other side. A point turner or a pin or something to kind of help you push out that corner. Nice. 90-degree angle for ours. This is really good, especially if your corset ends at a slant. So if you had a really kind of deep V in the back or something like that, where you're ending at a slant, this is a really nice, clean way to finish even at a slant. So for us, we're just gonna have 90-degree angles to get a really nice 90-degree angle corner. And then we're going to bring all of this bias strip to the inside. So this is the inside of our corset right now. And we're gonna pin from the outside so we can stitch in the ditch to close the rest of it. So from the outside, this is where we'll be stitching. We need to pin right in that seam line. And on the other side, make sure that you're actually catching that bias strip as you pin. So in order to successfully do the stitch in the ditch, you really have to be precise with your pinning. Okay, so we now have the neckline fully pinned. On each of those pins, you have to double check that back side and make sure that you are catching the bias strip so that later when you're doing the stitch in the ditch, you know you're going to catch the back of your fabric. When you go across your seams where your boning is at, you're going to have to be really careful to make sure that that boning doesn't cause you to go outside of your seam line. Okay, so just go nice and slow over those bumpy boning areas and stay in your ditch line. Okay, so double check the back once you've gotten done to make sure that you've caught that full neckline or full bias strip. And then we're going to repeat that process for our hemline. So this is the full finished neckline bias strip. Okay, so now looking at our grommets, now that you have your actual grommet in hand and you know the exact size of what your grommet is, we're going to look at just double checking placement, kind of remarking our center back. So this is my center back shell piece. We've got that seam allowance that is obviously already sewn, so we need that to stay empty. We also need that next ½ inch, which we forgot about this last time we did this. We need that next ½ inch to stay empty because that's where our boning is at. So scoot over after that And then we're gonna start marking where our grommets are gonna go outside that 1/2 inch where the boning is. So I'm gonna take one of my actual grommets and lay it here on my fabric, making sure to leave a 1/4 inch down from the stitch line and a 1/4 inch over from my boning. And I'm gonna mark the center. So we can just do a little dot right now, mark the very center. I'm gonna do the same thing down at the bottom. I'm gonna make sure I'm staying on a straight line. So right where that dot is, I'm gonna do a dashed line. So all of my grommets follow that same line, and then I'm gonna mark my bottom one. Again, leaving a 1/4 inch till the stitch line of my pattern piece. Okay, so I've got the center of each of those. Now I'm going to measure between those two centers. Mine is 5 1/8. Can somebody let me borrow a calculator or your phone calculator? So 5.125. And then I'm going to divide it by the number of spaces in between my grommets. So if I want, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grommets, I'm going to have 4 spaces in between. So 5.15 divided by 4, which equals about slightly over 1 1/4. It's 1.28. So I'm going to go 1 1/4 plus a tiny hair. 1 1/4 plus a tiny hair. 1 1/4 plus a tiny hair. So that is where I'm going to mark the centers. I'm going to do either X's or drill holes at each of those points. So you may have already marked yours when we were doing the pattern making process. Double check it now that you've got your actual grommets and make sure that they're going to fit in that spacing. Okay. Then we can transfer this over to our actual pattern piece. So I'm going to let that 1/2 inch seam allowance hang off the side because we've already got that stitched. Our cut line should match up with the top edge because we came in for that bias binding seam allowance. And now I can use my awl or something. I forgot my awl, so I'm going to use just a marking tool to transfer off those dots. So the instructions for my grommet kit are to mark the center, to like draw a circle in the center of that grommet. So I'm going to center that grommet over that drill hole and then kind of trace the center of that grommet. This kit that I got does not have a fabric cutter. Yours may. So if yours has the big hole punch that kind of punches a hole into your fabric, you can do that. Mine says to just cut it with the scissors. So in order to do that, I'm going to fold this and snip right in the center of that circle through all 3 layers. And I want to make sure not to cut outside of that circle because if I cut too big, I'll end up with frayed edges showing. Okay. Now on the right-hand side, my instructions say there's 2 different types of grommet pieces. There's one with a taller middle tower thing, and there's one with a shorter. So the one with the taller is the top. I'm going to put that through my garment from right to wrong side. My hole here needs to be a little bigger on the lining. Okay, so put that all the way through. I'm gonna flip over and I did not fully catch my bias strip. I'm gonna have to go back and fix that. Okay, so I've got that pushed through from right to wrong side. I'm going to rest that back side on top of my little holder. So put that down, and then this is just gonna fit into the little divot there. And then I'm gonna take that side that had the shorter tower, that's gonna go right on top. And it's a little bit wider hole on that one, so it should just fit right over. And then you've got this anvil, and the anvil also has a circle divot in it where it should fit right on top of that other side of the grommet. And then we're going to hammer it to help close that metal piece. Okay, so now I've got my grommet there closed from the outside, nice and clean and durable. I shouldn't have any frayed edges showing around my grommet. And I'll do that for each of the grommets going down. Okay, once you've got that on both sides of your center back, then you are done. You're ready to just put your lacing in there and your garment is complete.